All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Valor and Virtue. And first and foremost, I'm just going to kind of start this episode by saying I don't feel the best today. I have some food sensitivities, and I just threw caution to the wind last night and ate some stuff with my daughter because we were having a girls' night, and very much so regret it today. So we're getting through. We are pushing through, but a little low on the energy because of that. And then also, I might be wearing a hat for the foreseeable future of these episodes. Just kidding, not really, but my hair is kind of in that awkward stage now where it's not short enough to just kind of keep its shape, but it's also not long enough to do much with. So it gets these weird like kinks and like, it's okay. So I'm enjoying the hat as of right now. But I just wanted to say welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Erin. My background is in the health and fitness industry. I've been a part of it for over 10 years. And the whole goal of this podcast is to help you improve your life physically, mentally, and emotionally in some way, shape, or form. So this week, what I did was I hopped on my social media, on my Instagram, and I asked people what they would want to see as an episode this week. And I asked if you guys wanted to hear about my phobias and anxieties and how I deal with them. If you wanted to hear about my first marriage and how it made me who I am today. Or if you wanted to hear about what it was like opening up a business completely by myself at the age of 23. And my first marriage and the business actually tied on the poll. So this week, I'm going to go ahead and talk about my first marriage and how it made me who I am today. And then next week, I will talk about starting that business at 23 years old and what that looked like for my life. But I do want to preface this episode with saying that what I'm going to talk about is my side of the story of my first marriage. There are always two sides to a story. And I remember things the way I remember them, and it doesn't make it 100% right or 100% accurate. And I don't want whoever watches this to have a horrible view of my ex-husband because I was far from perfect as well. And as far as how things now go, like, I wish the best for him. I want him to be whole and happy. As far as I know, he's married and they have a kid, and I think that's wonderful. I think it's great. But I'm just gonna kind of jump into some background. Hopefully this episode is not too long. It is kind of a long story, and as you guys all know, I like to talk. So let's see if I can not talk for forever. But a little background, I grew up in a very Christian home, which I'm so thankful for. I'm so grateful for, and I'm grateful for my parents and the church that I grew up in. But I think, growing up in that environment, it's very much so, you fall in love, you get married, you have a family, then you have kids, and it seems like life is good and great. And that's just kind of what I grew up with. So growing up, I was very modest. I didn't have a ton of relationships. I was really focused on sports and those kinds of things. And when I was 16, I ended up meeting this guy, and he went to a different high school than I did, and he came to our youth group sometimes, and he was friends with the pastor's son, and I just thought he was the best thing since sliced bread. I remember we went to a homecoming dance, and I was with someone else and he was with someone else, and I just remember like he was dancing, he was good at dancing, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like, who's this guy, right? You're young, you're 16. It's like the silly things that entrance you at the time. And for the longest time, I tried to talk to him, go on dates with him, and early on there were like red flags that I should have known about. Like, he would have his parents, like, lie about him being home because he didn't want to talk to me, and I was definitely the pursuer, probably being obnoxious, to be honest. And then I did find out that he actually was in a relationship, so I stopped that. I had no idea he had a girlfriend at the time. But then a little while later, it was like a couple months went by, and I don't remember the circumstances which we met again, but for some reason we started talking, and we started kind of dating. Maybe I was, oh gosh, I don't even remember. Maybe I was 16 when I started. I don't remember how long we started dating before we got engaged. I think, you know what I think? Sorry, it's been so long. This was like 2006, 2008. It's funny, I forgot. Either way, fast forward, we were dating when I was 18, and we've been dating for a while. And I thought I was madly in love with him, right? And, okay. So I'm a bad storyteller. Sorry for those of you listening. We met when I was 16. He had a girlfriend. We started talking again when I was 17 or 18, and we had been dating for a while by the time that I was 18. And I had moved out of my parents' home when I was 17. I moved into an apartment and had been living there for a long time. And so I felt very grown up. I very much so felt like I was an adult, which I wasn't, but I felt that way at 18 years old, going to college, was working, just kind of doing life. And so when I was 18, it was New Year's, and he proposed. And so we had been dating, I think, for about maybe a year, and he proposed. And we had agreed to a long engagement, a 1.5-year engagement, to plan things and, you know, just take time, because it's kind of what everybody in the community, it felt like, did back then. But I will say this. So I preface the story with saying I wasn't in a ton of relationships, and I was really modest. Because when you grow up in a Christian home, it's very much like you don't have sex outside of marriage. And I had never done anything to the likes of that or anything close to that. And when I had started dating my ex-husband, we were a good bit into our relationship, and we ended up sleeping together. And I remember from that moment forward, I was like, we have to get married. Like, in my head, I was like, we have to get married, or this is, it felt like the end of the world. Like, this is the worst mistake that you can make. There's no coming back from it. And I'm not saying anybody had said that to me, but I just think from the years of kind of being raised in that culture and hearing it from different pastors and different things, it felt like the worst thing I could have ever done. And I immediately felt like if I didn't marry him, I was going to be a failure. So in my mind, I was going to do anything and everything to make that relationship work. Like, it was a non-negotiable. Like, it did not matter. It was going to work. So we got engaged at 18. He was 19. We had a 1.5-year long engagement. I grew up in a very loving home. No issues, no problems. My dad was a police officer. He retired as a police officer. I had a great relationship. To be honest with you, I don't know where the disconnect happened before I talk about what I talk about. I don't know if it was just the pressure that I put on myself that I had to marry him because we slept together before getting married, or if it was just like I'm gonna prove everybody wrong because we're so young, or if it was a combination of both. But there were a lot of, quote, red flags. That's what everybody talks about now, red flags, green flags. There were a lot of red flags before we ever said I do, and I never stepped away, and I should have. There's also a lot that I kept a secret because I felt like, you know, you can't share these things with other people. You can't air your problems with other people. Like, you have to keep everything to yourselves. You have to keep it within the confines of your relationship, yada, yada, yada. So that being said, he had told me all of this when we were dating and, before we ever got engaged. And he grew up in a very abusive home. his father was very physically abusive to his mother. He told me stories about watching his dad beat his mom with a baseball bat and his mom sneaking out a bathroom window. He told me stories of molestation between his brothers. Just really horrific stories that I just could not imagine having to live through. And at the time I trusted him that they were true. I'm not saying that they weren't. I do know for a fact that his dad was abusive to his mother. His mom confirmed that. But his parents were still together. And his dad had apparently turned his life around. It was a completely different person. And it didn't happen anymore. And all the time we were together, I never saw his dad hurt his mom. I saw his dad get angry sometimes, but I never saw his dad hurt his mom. And so a lot of my ex-husband's behavior I attributed to how he was raised. And I gave him a pass because I was like, he had to deal with A, B, C, and D. You know, he's acting like this because of this. And I let it as an excuse for his behavior to be okay, because I was like, well, I can't imagine going through that, and I can't imagine living with that. And so there was just a lot of like talking down to me, talking ugly to me, and there was never like any real big incident until this day, and I remember it really well. And the sad thing is that we were engaged. And I remember we were at my apartment at the time, and we were hanging on the couch, and I was trying to play with him, and I was just bugging, which I shouldn't have been. I was just bugging. I was like poking him and poking on him, and he was like, stop it. Like, I don't like that. Stop it. And I was like, oh, come on. Like, just play with me, right? Like, just poking. And I bugged him enough to the point where he snapped. And I remember we were kind of laying down, and this is my memory, and to be honest with you guys, sometimes I say this and I'm like, no, that didn't really happen. But it did. And I remember he flipped on top of me, and I was laying on the couch, and he was on top of me, and he put his hands around my neck like he was like choking me. And it immediately terrified me that he was choking me, because I had just been poking him, trying to play with him. And I went into fight or flight mode, and I got him off, and I ran into the bathroom of the apartment, and I locked myself in the bathroom of the apartment because he had just been choking me on the couch, and I was like fearing for my life. And he's yelling, like he's irate, and he's trying to break down the door, and he's breaking things like outside of the door. He's hitting the door so hard, like I'm like, I know the door is gonna break down. Like, I know it's gonna break down. I know it's gonna break. Like he starts hitting it, and the frame starts popping off, and he breaks the door in, and he comes into the bathroom, and he like comes at me, and we get into a scuffle, and like the towel rod breaks, and like I'm trying to like hit at him, and I kind of hit his, well, he grabs me from behind. Yeah, he grabs me from behind, and I headbutt him backwards, and he lets go, and I run away, and he's chasing after me. At the time I had dogs, and this is so stupid of me. I was like worried about my dogs, what he was gonna do to my dogs. And he runs after me, and I turn around, and I kick him in the balls, and he goes down, and I grab my dogs and run out the house. We get in the truck, and I just start driving, because I couldn't comprehend what just happened. The fact that I had just been like attacked by my fiance, which had never happened before. There had never been any physical altercation, and I just couldn't process it. And the whole time I was driving, I'm like hysterically crying, and I'm like, do I go to somebody's house and tell them? Do I call somebody and tell them? Do I just let it go? Like, what happens? And he's calling me, and my phone is ringing like crazy, and I'm just driving. And I think I ended up, I had like marks on my neck and my face, and like my head was hurting, and like there was just so much that had happened in what felt like a really short, fast period of time of chaos. And I think I drove around for like hours, and I finally came back to the house and he wasn't there, and I locked all the doors and I didn't know what to do. And we ended up talking, and he was like, I will never do that again. Like, I'm not going to be my dad. Like, I'm so sorry. And for whatever reason, I said okay. And I took him back. And I never told anybody what had happened. I never told anybody that we'd gotten in this physical altercation. And I went ahead with the marriage. And it never quite felt right. Obviously, there was red flags in my head. I was like, I was telling myself, like, your dad would be furious. Like, this would not be acceptable to him. Like, he's a police officer. Like, this just happened. Like, what are you doing? But I felt trapped because I was like, you slept together and you're engaged, and if you break it off, you committed this big sin, and everyone's gonna be like, we were right, we knew it wasn't gonna work, we knew it was a failure, blah blah blah. And I was like, no, I'm resolved to making this marriage work. So we got married. It wasn't even that good of a wedding day. We got in a massive fight right after we got married on the way to the reception. Like, huge knockdown, drag out fight. It was ridiculous. And from that moment on, things just continued to go downhill. We never got in a serious physical altercation again. He did hold to that promise. There were times where I felt cornered and he came at me, and like, I remember one time I decked him across the face because I felt threatened, too close. He had me in a corner and he was standing over me. But it became a very toxic relationship. I began to do things out of survival mode that weren't healthy for any relationship, and he became very verbally abusive. There was some sexual abuse, and nobody knew. We went to church every Sunday. We hung out with friends. We were really, really good at putting on a show. And we went to marriage counseling before we got married. Then we kind of went to counseling through all of this. Like, we were trying to do all the right things. And it was just extremely unhealthy. And what's crazy is I had lived, in my mind, an extremely healthy, loving, happy life up until this point. And I remember I started having like panic attacks, like severe panic attacks that were debilitating. I couldn't walk, I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I was extremely sick because I was living in this toxic environment. I remember one night we got in a fight and he chased me outside and held me in his arms, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs for help because I was scared, and our neighbor came out and he had his hand over my mouth, and he was like, the neighbor was like, is everyone okay? Does someone need help? Do I need to call 911? I remember he put his hand down and I said, no, we're okay. And he like put his hand back over my mouth, and we went inside, and he was like, you need to be quiet, and like crazy stuff. But so we were only married 1.5 years. Through that time, who I was began to deteriorate extremely. I was a very happy, outgoing, adventurous, do anything, go anywhere kind of person. And I became a very, I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything, I'm afraid. Like, I have panic attacks type of person. And I remember things really started to break. So I was 21, I think. 20? I don't remember. 2021. And we were trying to make things work, and I ended up getting pregnant. And we were like, okay, like, we're gonna have a baby and we're gonna make things work and things are gonna be okay. And I remember it was terrifying. And at 9 weeks, so it wasn't very far along. I found out at 4 weeks. I found out at 4 weeks that I was pregnant. And it was confirmed, blood tests, doctor's appointments, etc. And at 9 weeks, ended up having a miscarriage. And that rocked my world. That shook my entire world, because I was the kind of girl growing up that all I ever wanted to be was a mom. And so losing that baby rocked me, because I remember that when I was pregnant, we just fought so much. And I remember thinking in my head, like, the stress is gonna kill this baby. Like, I remember thinking that because I was so stressed all the time. And lo and behold, I ended up having a miscarriage, and I felt like it was all my fault that I couldn't keep that baby, that I couldn't make it work. It was like, your one job as a woman is to be able to carry children, and I couldn't do it, and things just kind of fell apart. And at the time, my husband was going to school, and he started talking to another woman. And I remember it made me really uncomfortable. Like, he was talking to her while I was pregnant, and he had told her about the miscarriage, and I think I had only met her once, and he was like, oh, we just have all these classes together, and yada, yada, yada. And I ended up meeting her, and it felt very weird. It felt very strange. Like, I felt like I was doing everything trying to make our marriage work, even though, again, I'm not perfect. There was a lot. There's so much more to the story, right? And I remember what happened is we had decided to move out of our apartment, and we moved into my parents, because they had a guest room that was like downstairs. It was separate. It was kind of like your own space, because we were going to save up money to buy a house, and we had this whole specific plan laid out. And when we moved in with my parents, I remember them starting to see some of who he really was and what was really going on in our marriage. And they started to slowly kind of step in and say, like, this is not okay, this is not healthy. And they ended up saying, putting boundaries down, being like, if you're going to treat her like this, you're going to have to leave. And I remember that he was talking to this girl, we were living with my parents, things were just being weird, and I was like questioning like their relationship and what was going on with us. And out of the blue, he ended up taking me on a really amazing weekend. It was like, he wasn't the same person. He was really loving, he was really kind, really caring, and he took me kind of on this like mini vacation, and we had the best time. And I was like, okay, here we go. Our marriage is turning around. Like, the counseling is paying off. Like, things are paying off. And then my parents were out of town, and so we just had the house to ourselves. And I remember we had kind of gotten in a little bit of an argument over something a couple days later, and I had gone to work, I had come home, and he was gone. All of his things were packed up. He was completely gone. And I was like, where are you? What's going on? Where did you go? And he said, I got an apartment. I want a divorce. We're done. And I was so confused. And like I said, things had not been perfect. We had been fighting. But from that point forward, we were separated. When my parents got back, I had to tell them what happened. And for many months, which people did not know about, we were separated, and I was doing everything in my power to make the marriage work. I went back to counseling, and I asked him to go to counseling with me. He went to one session. We came out of that session, and he said, I want a divorce. I am handing you papers. And he filed for divorce. I told him I wouldn't do it. He filed for divorce. He did hand me papers. And I refused to sign them. I remember, I try not to edit these, like I said, but Little Miss needed something. So anyway, I was refusing to sign the papers, and he was like pushing. And I remember in my head, I was like, there's no reason for us to get divorced. Like, you have not cheated on me. And in my head, the abuse wasn't bad enough to walk away. And I was just refusing. And I remember there were multiple people that came to me kind of during this time period telling me that he had cheated on me, but I was like, he says he didn't. He swears up and down he didn't. Like, I need proof. And, you know, what they were telling me was like just hearsay or what they heard from him, and I just didn't believe it. And I was like, no, like, he's looked me dead in the eyes and said that he never cheated on me. And so I just wouldn't do it because I was going to fight for my marriage. And then I remember things started getting bad. Like, he was getting really drunk. And so he would call my home in the middle of the night. I was still living with my parents because I didn't have anywhere else to go. And my dad would intercept those phone calls and we'd be talking to him. And he was talking about suicide and things just escalated really quickly. And so I remember that there was one night I was in my bedroom, like face down on the ground, just crying, praying to God, like, why is this happening to me? Like, I tried so hard all of my life to do the right thing. And when I did the wrong thing, I tried to make it up. And I was like, I can't let go of this marriage. I can't be 21 years old and divorced. Like, what am I going to do with my life? What is that going to look like for my life? Like, I can't do this. Like, I have to make my marriage work. And I just remember I felt like God said, it's okay. It's okay to let go. I'm releasing you from this. And I know that sounds really cheesy. It makes me like really emotional thinking about it today. But I was floored. It's one of the few times in my life I really felt like I heard God speak to me. And I just wept. I just laid on the floor and wept. Because for the first time in years, it felt like this huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Like, I was going to be okay. And that it was okay to walk away. And so it was this whole experience. And I remember after the experience, the next day, I told my dad, I was like, okay, like, I'm willing to sign the divorce paper. And so I signed the papers and we are officially divorced. And for me, I was like, okay, like, I'm done. God said that I can let go. It's okay to let go of this marriage and it's okay to move on. And I began to move on. And we had been separated for months. And like, I started over. I deleted my Facebook and I just started over. I didn't say we got divorced. I wasn't telling the world we were divorced. I just began to move on with my life. And if somebody asked me, I told them. Well, he was now my ex-husband and he began to spiral even more. So he started going on his social medias, talking about how he made the biggest mistake of his life and quoting scripture. And people in church started getting involved and being like, what's going on with you guys? And like, I had to kind of share my story. And a lot of people were really on his side because they didn't know what had happened, because I always kept my private life private. I didn't air it to the world. And then my ex started following me. So he began to just show up at my place of work and like wait for me to be done with work so I could come outside because he wanted to talk to me. Or he would write notes and leave them at work, like being like, you have to come back with me. I made a mistake. You have to marry me. After I told him, like, you can't do this. We're divorced. And then he began showing up at my home. I ended up getting a house, ended up moving out of my parents' house, so I was living by myself. He found out where I was living, and he ended up that he would just show up in the middle of the night, banging on my door, yelling at the top of his lungs, drunk, that he had to talk to me. So I ended up having to start calling the police and dealing with it, and after a long period of time, we ended up having to get a restraining order, and going to court, and he had to admit to everything that he had done in order for the restraining order to be put into place. And that was it. So from the time that I was 19, sorry, my podcast on this side messed up. Okay, sorry. So from the time that I was 19 until the time that I was 21, it had felt like I was in this like living hell, essentially. And it completely changed who I was as a person. And I finally began to start building back up who I was and beginning to be that girl again of trusting people, going through counseling, working through the trauma. But the biggest couple things that I could take out of it was that God let me walk through that so that one, I could have a testimony. Because I used to always pray for a testimony because I was like, my life feels perfect and I don't feel like I can relate to anybody because I've never walked through anything hard. Well, I probably shouldn't have prayed for that because I got exactly what I asked for. But it showed me how strong I can really be. And it changed the course of who I was as a person for forever. And I think that it made me who I am today in the sense of knowing that you can walk through fire, whatever your fire is, and you just have to keep fighting and trusting in God. And He will be there for you. Maybe not when you want. I mean, He's always there for you, but He might not show up in the way that you want when you want it. But He'll be there in the right time where it will all work for the good of His glory. And I can't imagine my life any other way today. I wouldn't have my husband that I have now. We wouldn't have our children. We wouldn't have the life that we have together. I wouldn't have been able to relate to so many women who've gone through the same thing. I wouldn't be able to love them and say, hey, I've been there. Let me help in any way that I can help. And I wouldn't have done the things that I did, walking through that and then coming out of it and walking through the healing process of that really created a confidence in me that allowed me to open a business all by myself at 23 years old and to see the value and the worth in myself again. And so, I know this is a really long, I knew this was going to be long, and I kind of lost my train of thought with my daughter coming in, so I apologize. But I guess I just wanted to share this because I think that so many people walk through so much in life and we just have no idea. And that's okay. I'm not saying we should have any idea, but what I think is that we can learn to value the knowledge and the wisdom sometimes that other people try and share. And I think we can also learn to value to just love somebody. Just be nice to somebody because you don't know what they're walking through. I can't tell you the amount of people that later on when everything came out were like, we had no idea. And, no, not that they should have had any idea, but I remember the people that were kind to me and nice to me and poured into me when I was having a really bad day. Maybe I wasn't being the nicest, but they loved me anyway, even though they had no idea that what was going on. And so I think it's important to remember, like, as we go about our day-to-day, like, you have no idea what's going on behind someone's closed doors. So the best thing you can do is just be kind. Smile. Like, be nice. There's no reason to make their day worse. You have no idea what's going on in their life. And that's okay. You don't need to know what's going on in everybody's life, contrary to what social media will say. But it is important to know that people walk through things and people go through things, and the best thing you can do is to just love on somebody. And if you are walking through something or if you are going through something, know that it will end. Everything eventually ends, which I know can sound depressing, but the good things will end. The bad things will end. There will always be valleys. There will always be mountains. That's just life. So if you're stuck in a valley, like, it will come to an end. And you will be okay. Find people that love you. Find people that will take care of you. And know If you choose to, you will come out of it stronger and better and wiser, and God has a plan. But you can't just sit in the mud. You got to do something about it. You got to keep moving. You have to get up. You have to keep going. And don't stop, because you never know what that hardship might end up doing for you. Because that hardship made me the confident go-getter who opened a business at 23 years old all by herself and owned a very successful gym for 7 years, where I met my husband and now have 2 beautiful children and a wonderful life. But that wouldn't have happened without all of that. So, hindsight, right? But I hope you guys are doing well. There's so much more to that story. If you want to hear any more about it, I don't know, you can. Or if you have something to comment. It felt a little disheveled after my daughter came in. I'm really sorry. I had a direction that I was going. Just kind of threw me off. Also, when I get emotional about things, it kind of throws me off. But I just want to share it to be relatable, to let you guys know that you're not alone. You're not walking through anything alone. Nobody's perfect, contrary to what everything looks like everywhere. But I love y'all. Just remember to take things one day at a time. I hope you guys have a good one. All right, something I realized watching that video back that I completely failed to mention is that going through that divorce is why I fell in love with health and fitness again. That was kind of the whole point. Well, not the whole point, but one of the reasons I was making the video is to talk about the fact that during our separation and then after the divorce is when I really started working out again and taking care of myself, making myself first, making myself priority, getting into the gym every day. And that is where I began to fall in love with working out and realizing that it can be a form of therapy, that it can help you in so many more ways than just physical health, but also mental health. And that is where the passion got ignited and where it all began for me to fall in love with coaching people in their fitness. And then that goes right into me opening the gym, which I'll talk about next week. But I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I am sorry it was a little disheveled and all over the place. It's hard for me sometimes to stay focused and on task when I talk about really emotional things that I've dealt with. But thank you guys for watching. Thank you for your support. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It does help me. And also, if you are interested at all in being coached by me, it is only $5 a month. It's called Driven Fitness. There's a link in the description, and you get 3 workout tracks: functional bodybuilding, functional fitness, and express workouts, which are 30 minutes or less. So if you want to join, go ahead. I would love to coach you. I would love to help you along your journey, because like I said, it's not just a physical one, it's also a mental one. But I hope you guys do well, and I hope you guys have a good day. Thanks so much. See you guys next time.